been with CADimensions for almost 17 years now, and this is a topic that I think affects everyone, and most likely everyone online here. Understanding SolidWorks referencing and the errors that are caused when you mismanage files. Obviously, there are problems created by day-to-day use, and my hope here is to give you more of an understanding as to why it happens, and maybe make you think twice about your approach in some of the day-to-day tasks that you do. I understand that there's always, in a lot of organizations, rogue individuals that get access to data and just do their own thing. Somehow, some way, we've got to get to those folks, show them this webinar, and maybe explain to them its effect on your day-to-day work. So what we're going to cover today on the agenda is we're going to talk about file references, what that even means in SolidWorks, how it happens. But then we're going to talk about the root of file references, what we call file and face identification, what really allows the software to work together. All of that is linked with this reference search routine, which is how SolidWorks finds files. And then we'll close it up with how we handle these references, you know, if I want to change them or work with them. So we'll get more in detail. If you're a new SolidWorks user, you know, it's going to be a pretty deep conversation. Maybe take some notes. Feel free to contact me after the fact. We can talk through this a little more. I have no problem with that. So I always like to start out just illustrating how big of a problem it is in SolidWorks to deal with references. Take a simple drawing, for example. It may have references or pointers to a part or an assembly. Well, that assembly might have a pointer to individual components within that. It might have a reference to another subassembly. It might have internal parts. This is a function in SolidWorks, a part that exists only inside the assembly. The file reference may have mirrored parts. You might have used the command called derive part or insert part, split part. You might have used a design table. You can link a design table externally. You might have used the design binder. And to make this even more confusing, you may have used in-context references. So looking at just this illustration here on a very, very small scale, you begin to understand why there's such an issue managing references and relationships between files. There's a lot of them, potentially a lot of different types of relationships that are built into SolidWorks. So our goal today is to understand what SolidWorks does to manage this for you and how some of the moves that we make could affect what happens here. Now, in general, SolidWorks stores the path to the file within the drawing or assembly, a pointer to where that thing was located. But it's not as cut and dry as that, and that's what I'm going to illustrate here today. When you have issues, when you know you have reference problems, we end up with errors. So my first part of this is I want to take you through and let's create some files with errors. So I've done this and illustrated this on my system here. Let's start with the first one. Everything that I'm showing today is really related to a small assembly of 7, 8, 9 parts. I think it's easier for us to understand what's going on here. But I'm just going to start by opening up this cylinder assembly from a directory, and I get my first error. You know what? And I'm a SolidWorks user. I've been doing this all the time. I just you hit a button, and I'm not really sure what I hit, but my assembly blew up. Okay. You know, I'm not sure what happened. Somebody must have changed something. It was good yesterday. I'm not really sure. We're going to understand this a little more, but this is kind of how it manifests itself as an error. You know, I open up an assembly and the thing's just blown up. Now that message box that popped up, I have the potential to dismiss that message box, and I'll never see it. All I'm going to do is open up this assembly, and it's broken, and I don't understand why. Now, I'm going to do this again just to show you what the message says, and we'll talk more about it as we go along. So this error is caused by a document that the assembly is pointing to that has a non-matching internal ID. Okay, we know that that's a problem. Maybe you don't understand exactly what that is. We will talk in detail what an internal ID is. Okay, in my case, I just said use the file anyway, and when I did, it opened it up and it blew it up. Okay, so there's one example of an issue that I might have. So let's go to another example here. I'm just going to open up the cylinder, and it says, hey, you know what? I can't find the file. Well, I have two choices at this point. I can browse to where the file is, which a lot of you will do, or I can just say suppress the component. But notice here again, there's the option to do not show again. If I hit suppress, what this thing's going to do is every time I open a file and it can't be found, it's going to suppress it. And I open it up, hey, what happened to this assembly? It was good yesterday. I've got a bunch of errors. Something happened here. Okay, well, what could be causing that? So there's another example. My third example here, we'll go ahead and open this thing up. I want to talk about this. Let's open up a part. Okay, here I am. I'm making a design change for an ECN. It's so important to my company, and again, I'm just going to do something crazy here and just add a whole bunch of fillets on this thing. Looks great. I'm done. Let's go ahead and save it. I'm going to close it out, and then now when I do a file open up that that same thing, and oh, that one actually found it. Now this one is hit and miss. What I was expecting to happen is for the file not to be found, for it to have the one without the fillet on it. Now that will happen a majority of the time. A lot of you are seeing those types of errors where you make a change to a part, your expectation is that the part is changed, but when you open the assembly, it shows it unchanged. Now back to my PowerPoint for a moment. I want to break these down a little further and talk about why I do see some of these errors. Okay, it really starts at the root with two things. What we call face IDs and file IDs. Okay, so I'm going to break these down first of all. First of all, file ID. So the file ID in SolidWorks, think of this as just a value that SolidWorks gives the file, a number or some information that makes it unique. Well, SolidWorks does not make this public. It's not like they publish, oh, this is the file ID for this part. The error that we had earlier said that, hey, the file IDs of these files are different than what I had stored. It was looking for one thing and found something completely different. So that causes an error. Now, file ID is created in a very unique way. So we're all used to being able to right-click on a file in Windows and seeing the created date. Now, this is done in the document summary, and sometimes this created date can be modified in Windows. But inside of there, inside the file itself, is something called the document summary created date, and there are ways to get this information out of the file. This value is generated the moment the file was created. The date, the time, the hour, minute, second, right down to the exact second. So that value does not change when the file is saved, moved, or copied. This is what keeps a file ID in SolidWorks the same when you go from one file to another. Now, that being said, how the heck did I get a file that opened up that said the file ID is different? Well, we're going to show that a little bit later, but you can create file IDs that are the same geometry but different. So keep in mind this is not the SolidWorks creation date because that can change the SolidWorks custom property. The only way in SolidWorks that you can trick the software into making two files with the exact same ID is to have two people create the same file with the same file name at the exact same second. Other than that, if you get a file ID error, a pretty good understanding that, hey, this file was created by a different person or on a different date and time. It's a completely different file, has not been saved, moved, or copied. Okay, we'll talk about how this rears its head. The other thing is a face ID. Now, you saw that when I had the file ID error, that the mates all blew up. What happens with a face ID when you create geometry? SolidWorks assigns a number, a value to that every face edge of that model itself. Now those faces and edges are what you use to add fillets, to sketch on, to mate to other components. The problem with face IDs is they change depending on the geometry changes that you make when features are added or removed. But they do not change when you save, move, or copy a part. That's why I can make a copy of a part, replace it in the assembly, and all the mates stay together. However, if I make geometry changes, that potentially could blow up the mates. Now let's look at face IDs, because that's something I can get from SolidWorks here for a moment. Let's go ahead and close that down. And I'm just going to open up an example I have here. And I apologize, I'm going to have to do a lot of browsing today to illustrate a lot of the points that I have. Simple block, right? I had one of our folks here in the office create a macro that goes in and gets me the face ID. Okay, so I select the face that I want. I click my little macro here, and the software gives me an ID number. You can see the value here. Now, the way he wrote his code is it takes this really long face ID and it makes this hashed ID, which is his idea to give a unique value. If you want to really see what a face ID looks like, that's what it looks like. Many, many characters. Okay? So let's just look at that face ID again. We'll remember a few of the characters. It's a negative value, and we'll say 1687. Okay? So if I decide to come in here and maybe place some fillets on here. All right, we'll do all these surfaces and apply it. And if I now check the face ID, you can see a completely different value. Okay? If something was mated to the previous face, now that the face ID has changed, that mate's going to blow up. It's not going to find that face because it's changed. Okay? Now let's talk about some things that maybe don't affect it. I could come in here and make a sketch on this face, put a hole in it, do a through all, and now if I grab the face ID, it's exactly the same. For those of you who can remember that 8 or 9 digit number, that is exactly the same. So what I'm saying is that your geometry changes may or may not change the face IDs. If I did a save as on this thing and made a copy, the face IDs would not change. Okay? So face IDs and file IDs are very important to what we're dealing with. Now, the key to this is the software has to find the files it's looking for. Apologize. Let's go here. So in order to find the files, we have to understand where it's looking for the files. Now there's a tool in SolidWorks called List External References. Let's go ahead and open up the assembly here as well. Get back to SolidWorks. And I'm just going to open up my cylinder assembly. I have one sitting right in here. And everything opens up beautiful. But if I come in and go to File, Find References, I have a good idea as to where the software found each of the referenced files for that assembly. Now this is my baseline for the presentation today. Find References is your verification to make sure you know where it found the data. Now that being said, I don't know for sure if that was the last path where these files were saved or what was stored in this assembly. Okay? These could have been in completely different locations the last time the assembly was saved. But the file I have open are using these files in these paths. So if I were to change any of these right now, they're going to change at this path. Okay, so back to my assembly, my PowerPoint for a moment. The real key to all this is the file name. When SolidWorks searches for a file on open, it's looking for the file name. And you're going to see how that affects it here in just a moment. No matter where it looks, if the file name is different, it won't find it. Plain and simple. However, if your organization is creating copies of files, whether it's through pack and go, copying a folder, dragging it onto your desktop, okay, making a copy for a vendor, if the file name is the same anywhere else in your system, you have the potential to have all these errors that we're talking about today. Okay? Now, the reason for that is this. Now, this is going to be a little bit more complex conversation, but I'm going to illustrate this. When a file is opened in SolidWorks, when it's looking for a file that has a certain ID, when it's trying to bring that file in and update all the mates and the features and rebuild everything, it goes through a search routine. You can find this in the help. Just type in reference document search routine. I've simplified it a little bit here. The first thing the software does is look for any file that's already loaded in memory. So if you have 10 files of the same name on a computer and you have the wrong one open of the same name, it will replace it. It will open it. It will then look into a location called reference documents, and again, I'm going to show a lot of these. It's going to do what we call a recursive search, which a recursive search is its way of adding more file locations to the path so it could potentially find it. Okay? You're going to see that in what I'm doing. And then it's going to look in the last place it found a document. And maybe it found a document on your desktop. Well, I'm going to look there too to see if maybe this other file's there. And then it's going to do a recursive search on that last path. So it's going to start adding other folders to it. Then finally it gets to the last path where the software found a file. You know, it's finding files along the way. I'm going to look there too. Finally, later on in the process, it says, oh, now I'm going to look where the file was last saved. Now, to me, maybe you'd want to look at that first, right? Whatever I stored, you want to look first, but that's not how SolidWorks works. At the end, if it can't find this, then it does the option to browse to the file. Now, I don't expect you to understand all these steps. You can really get in deep if you go into the help, but I wanted to illustrate the issues a little bit by making some day-to-day changes with files. So let me get out of here for a moment. We're going to go ahead and close up our cylinder because we know that's good. We know it opens good. Let's go in here to my cylinder assembly, and what I've done is just put every file in its own folder. Let's start out with some of the things that we might do. I'm going to take this tube and I'm just going to go ahead and rename it. I rename it in Windows Explorer. I don't expect SolidWorks to find it because it's looking for a file named tube. So let's go ahead and find my cylinder again. We'll go ahead and open it up. And, it actually found something. If I go to File, Find References, it found a tube in a different folder. You can see here, it's found this tube part in a completely different folder called the tail cap. All right, I get it. I know what it's doing now, so let's go to my folder called tail cap, and I'm going to just delete that. Okay, I'm not really sure if it's good or bad. We'll go ahead and get it out of there, and let's open our cylinder. Okay, so now it got through the entire process and said, you know what, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. Okay, so I mentioned in the search routine that I can now browse for the file. Now, if I'm browsing for the file, I have to know where it's stored. I have to know the location. Otherwise, it's just going to do what it just did there and suppress it. Okay. Let's make some other modifications. Let's just say my tube that was in the tail cap, the one that was there, I'm going to rename the original. I'm going to rename that back to tube, and I'm just going to make a copy of it. All right, and I'm going to put this right in the same folder as the cylinder exists. No big deal. All right, let's open the cylinder. Everything's still good. I'm thinking I'm in great shape here. Everything looks good. Now when I look at this thing, it's no longer using the one from the tail cap folder. It's using the one from the cylinder folder. Why? Because the search routine found the one in the cylinder folder first before it got to the step in the process where it can grab the tail cap. Okay? Keep going on this. Let's get rid of the, we have nothing in the tail cap. We're going to get rid of the tube here. And I'm going to move this cylinder file. I'm going to cut this and put it in a completely different spot. I'm actually going up one more level. I'm in a completely different folder than the cylinder's in. So let's try to open this thing up. I'm assuming it's not going to find it. And great, it didn't find it. Okay? Now, I'll let it suppress it. Let's take one more step in the process. I know I'm moving stuff around, trying to illustrate what's going on here, but I'm trying to get the point across that the software can absolutely find data at any point in time. So I'm going to actually get rid of the tail cap too. Let's say I deleted that thing. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I just deleted it. I moved it somewhere else. So now I've got two files that I've potentially made some changes to, or somebody made a change to. What happens when I go ahead and try to open that cylinder again? It says, hey, do you want to find the tail cap? Sure, I know where that is. I moved that to my library. So let's come in here. I've got a library. We'll go ahead and open it up in there. Oh, wait a minute. Not only did it find the tail cap, but it found the tube. Well, if you saw that before, it couldn't find the tube. I don't have the tube. As you can see, it's not in the original cylinder folder. It's not in the tube folder. It's not in the tail cap folder. Where is it getting the tube from? Well, this is where file find references again comes into play. File find references. You can see because of the search paths, the software found the cylinder in the library, or the tube in the library. So some crazy things happening there. So let's go even further. Again, illustrating some of the different scenarios I'm sure you've run into. So now I'm in the cylinder and I'm looking through the old revisions of one of my components, in this case the tube, and I'm just going to go and open up the cylinder. Okay, we'll go ahead and open that thing up. Oh, it says it can't find the tail cap. Okay, I'll just tell it to suppress it, that's fine. But notice it found the tube, because the first step in the process is to find the file that's open in memory. Because I had the tube open, you can see that it found the old revision of the cylinder. I hope I'm getting across at the potential issues here. Let's go one step further here. I'm going to close this thing down. In the options of SolidWorks, under File Locations, is something called Referenced Documents. You go to Show Folders for Referenced Documents, and now you can add folders that you want the software to look in when it doesn't find the file. So I'm telling it to look in User, Admin, Desktop, Library. If I go to the External References tab, I can say Reference Documents specified in File Location, include the subfolders. Now what happens is that becomes part of the search routine. I'm going to close this thing right down. Remember, I had an issue finding the cap. If I do a file open now, and I go once again to my desktop, and references, find the cylinder we've been working with the whole time. It found everything. Okay, well, let's figure out where it found everything. Now look at this. My entire project is now pointing to a completely different folder. Completely different folder. Okay. All right, so let's keep going on this. Let's just keep illustrating. Let's get rid of this file location for reference documents. I see that thing just backfired completely. Let's go to Explorer, and I'm going to take the tube file, and I'm just going to put it in there in the cylinder folder. You can't find it under there. It never had a clue it was even there. It's in a subfolder. Oh, it's still looking for the tail cap. Yeah, I'll just tell it to suppress that. That's fine. Oh, it didn't find the tube. Okay, so we're all right. Had no idea where that tube happened to be. All right, let's take the tube. We'll throw it on the desktop. Try that again. Yeah, suppress that. Still don't find it. Now, there are scenarios here, and I'm just going to try to repair this for a second, that I can make that find the file. Okay, I'm just going to restore my tail cap for a moment. I'm going to bring my tube back where it originally resided, and then I'm going to open my cylinder so everything is found. Hopefully this is not too confusing when we go through this. I'm just going to browse for the tube here. Oh, there was no tube in there. That's why it's not being found. So let me restore my tube just for a moment. Restore you. Want to make sure I have my tube in the right spot. Cut. And we're going to go to the tube folder and put it back. All right. So let's just make sure this thing opens up as expected, right? Everything's there. I can even save this thing. It's all good. Okay, file find references shows me that everything is in the proper folder. My tube is in the tube folder. Now, I've seen this a million times, and hopefully this will work for us. Hey, I got to make a copy of this file for, send to a customer. I'm just going to make a copy of it on my desktop and zip it up. And what happens here, I open it up and it still found the tube. Well, find references, look at that. It just went to the desktop and found it. My message here is that the search routines that SolidWorks imposes makes it almost impossible to be able to have copies of a file in different locations of the same name and not expect there to be issues. Almost certainly, you can see even some variation in just the stuff I'm trying to show where it changes. Almost certainly, if you're making copies of files, it's going to find the wrong file. And when it finds the wrong file, the file ID can be different, the face IDs can be different, therefore blowing up your mates and blowing up your assemblies. Okay? Very, very easy to do anytime you make copies. Now, I was able to illustrate the face ID issue as well. What I did to do that, you can see that this cap opens up just fine, right? The tail cap, that's the one we were using. The head cap, I'm sorry. You can see opens up just fine, okay? If I open up my desktop, references, I'm going to make the software find the wrong head cap. So I have another copy of the head cap that I made some changes to. I don't have some of the features in there. I just happen to have it open because I think it's the right file. I found it. It must be right. Well, there are some variations here. So now when I go to open up the cylinder, it's not going to throw me with any errors except, hey, there's a file with the same name already open. The internal ID of the file does not match. Remember how we talked about this? the file that I have open is not the same ID as the one that was used in the assembly. The software is going to give me the option to still open it. But notice what happens. It blows up my pattern. It blows up some of my features within the part. Okay, anything that doesn't exist where the face IDs are different, it's going to blow it up. Okay, that's where we end up with issues. Let me do that one more time because let me blow this thing up. File open. What I want to select in this case and what makes it blow up is it accept this file anyway. In other words, load that cap. And you can see because the new cap does not match the face IDs of the old cap, the mates just go haywire. Almost every account that I talk to that has issues with referencing has to do with mate errors. Mates in files not found. Mate errors are specific because the face IDs are different. That's it. Two files that are loaded, when the face IDs change, it can't attach the mate anymore. But anytime you have copies where the files are in different states of design, another example of very easily being able to see a face ID issue. Now we're running out of time here a little bit, so I want to keep going and close up here. Now that you understand the references, now that you understand where the issue comes from, the bottom line is don't create copies ever. If you create copies, you are absolutely creating a nightmare for yourselves. Okay? Changing references is something that we can do. If you go to file references and you figure out, hey, you know what, this thing found a file in the wrong spot, during the search routine, you can change references in many places. You can do a replace, you can do in the save as, in the open, and there's save as advanced. Let me just show you a few of these. I'm not going to go in depth. Okay, let's just do open for a second. If I do a file open on a file, there is a references button here. Okay. Close it down just so we're not using the same one. Get rid of you. File, open, cylinder, references. So this shows you where the referenced files are stored within the assembly, what the path is. However, I can come in here, double click on a path, and browse to where I want it to find the data. So I can go cylinder, I can go find my tube. I can even point this to an old revision if I wanted to. Okay, so you can re-reference on open. I can re-reference on save as well. So when I do a save as, this one's a little different. They kind of hid it in there. If you're looking, you have to select include all reference components and then hit the advanced button. In here, when I'm doing a save as, I can also save under a new name by just changing the name in this column here, or a new path. But again, I can affect those references and what it's pointing to. Okay. We also have file replace, pretty simple. I showed you save as, advance, and open references as well. The other one is file save as, just in the save as dialog. If I have a part open and I decide to do a save as while the assembly is open, many of you have seen this before. This is really just ties to our conversation, as I'm trying to create a copy of the file, hopefully under a new name, and it's asking me what to do with the assembly that's open that's pointing to this file name. The first one says I'm going to save the document with a new file name. Any documents that are open will refer to the new file. So if I call this tube 2, the assembly that I have open will be tube 2 as well. The second one, save as copy and continue, saves it under a new name, but does not change the references of the assembly you have open. The caveat to that is the copy will be saved to disk and will remain closed. They used to have an issue when you did the save as copy and continue, is that people thought that the file they had open was the copy. So they started making modifications to it and they started changing the original file. So they added the third option, save as copy and open. What this does is it saves the new file name without changing references, the copy is saved to disk, and then it opens up. So if I call this tube 2, I'll go do this right here. We'll call this tube 2, save it. You'll notice now tube 2 is open, and I can continue to modify. If I go back to the cylinder assembly, go to File, find References, you can see it's still pointing to the original tube. Okay. If I open this thing up and do a Save As, and then use the original option, I'll call this tube 3. Okay, it creates tube 3, opens it up, but now when I go back to the cylinder assembly, notice it's pointing to tube 3. So you have to be very, very careful with the options that you're selecting for references. Again, I can't get this across enough. Use File, find References for verification. This is very easy on the 8 or 10 part assembly. I can imagine it's very, very difficult in a very, very large assembly. So what they've done in here is you have the ability to copy the list. You can actually copy this list out to another file, copy and paste it into Excel and so on. So you can verify it that way. So there are many different ways that we can kind of work with that. I mentioned a little bit about copying references. Pack and Go does a copy of reference. We're not going to get into that today. Save As with references, I showed you a little bit of that. The one I want to really drive home and is another potential error spot is assemblies with in-context features. This always seems to be a sore spot. If I grab an assembly here, let's close down this one. We'll use a very, very simple assembly with an in-context feature. How we make copies is very different when there are in-context features. Okay, so this is a simple, it's got one part and a file that was created in reference to it. When I do a file save as, and I do a save as copy, okay, I'm going to call this tie down 2. Okay, I'm making a copy of the assembly, and I want to continue. Okay. First thing you're going to notice is this option here. This option says, hey, you know what? You're trying to make a copy of an assembly that has external references. If you decide to do this, your references will not update at all. Okay? If you want to do this, you have to give new names to the, in this case, the strap that has the external reference in order for it to update. Okay? I say, okay, cancel. I go into include all referenced, hit advanced, and now in the advanced dialog, where I showed you, we can update the references. I can go in here, call this strap 2, and do a save all. Okay, now that new assembly tie down 2, okay, will have a part that will update. Okay. I think I've gotten through most of what I wanted. I want a little disclaimer here. A majority of what we're talking about here, PDM manages for you. Now, I know there's a lot of PDM groups on the call here today. The reason I say disclaimer is because if you're working in PDM, this is fantastic. You don't have to worry about any of this stuff. But the minute you start making copies outside of PDM, putting it on your desktop, on the server, on another drive, and doing all these things outside of a managed environment, you have the same problems. Your SolidWorks can still find the file that's sitting on your desktop because of the reference search routine. And all of a sudden, now you're creating issues, pointers outside the vault. The lesson here is essentially just don't make copies. PDM is going to be light years away from just trying to manage this in Windows. Very few issues related to references when you're working in PDM, unless you get people working outside. So I know we went over a bit today. I want to thank you. My email is kevin@CADimensions.com. I'm sure there's lots of questions. We can certainly talk some more by email at any point in time. I hope this didn't scare you in any way. It's just really to bring the reality of what SolidWorks does to find files, and maybe educate that we've got to kind of change our ways. If you're seeing these issues, maybe stop making copies. I think you're going to see a little bit better. All right, we have a few questions. I'm going to go ahead and go there. First question, on each of the dialogues that dismiss within X seconds, what is the default if the user doesn't pick an option? The default is 10 seconds, I believe. That's what mine is defaulted to. I changed mine to 20 for this illustration here. You notice when I sat there with the error messages, it just kind of closed out. It accepted the defaults. You can set how long that happens as far as dismissing that message. Okay, number 2, will you allow us to copy the PowerPoint presentation? Absolutely. Send me an email at kevin@CADimensions.com and I'll send you a PDF of the presentation. I have no problem. Also, as always, the presentation will be archived on our YouTube channel as well as our website. We'll let it live up there for quite a while. Another question, does PDM manage when the file's checked out to a local cache? Yes, it does. When it's checked out to a local cache, the way it uses the referencing, it's still pointing to an explicit location locally. It's very hard to get copies of a file in 2 separate cache locations. That was able to happen with some things in PDM, but it's been remedied to the best of my knowledge. So we should be good. Default option. Question about the first one with the default time was about the default option. And let me just, I don't believe you can set the default option. I think it has a default option, but I don't believe you can set the default option. I have a little note here. Somebody's having trouble with the work group to PDM migration. Mike, if you want to just send me an email, just make sure that our team has run the migration tool for you. We can certainly, there is a migration tool from workgroup to PDM, so we can certainly make sure that everything is going through there. You should not be manually migrating that data over. The migration tool will move it all over, update all the references and pointers, and get it all in the database for you. I can imagine if you're doing a manual move that the effort is probably causing reference errors. Question from Steve, why is pack and go better than save as? Honestly, Steve, they're pretty much the same thing with the exception that the pack and go interface has more options to it. It allows you to better graphically see what's going on, make copies of some things, and utilize the old path of others. It's really a lot of the same stuff. There are more options, however, in the pack and go. Both of them are going to work the same way. Okay. Another question associated with the dialogue. If the user does not pick an option and the dialog dismisses, what does SolidWorks do? What option does SolidWorks use? Let's just let's create an error here and see what happens. File open, and we'll go to some of my errored files here. Okay, so you can see the one that's highlighted. It should be, no, I guess that probably isn't what it's taken. Let's see when it dismisses it here. One of these is going to be set as the default. We're going to have to figure out, you can see automatically in 1 second. Yeah, this actually defaults to suppress the file. I might have to look further into that. I'm assuming, Don, that there is a default option for each. It's hard to say, looking at the dialog, which one is the default. If you look at the messages section, dismiss reference, update dialog boxes when open assemblies. The only option we really have to set is a time. That being said, a lot of times when we dig into this, there is a value in the registry that's stored. We may be able to look at that and see if there's some way to set a default. Not everything's accessible, so we'll have to look into that. Okay. Next question. When moving local files into a vault, what is the best practice to ensure that the references do not get mixed up during the move? During the move, we use a lot of pack and go to take the local files and move them into the vault. First of all, during the pack and go, you want to make sure that the pack and go has found the file in the right spot, because that's what you're moving over. As soon as you move it over, you need to remove the old files from the old location. So you have to be able to eliminate the possibility of SolidWorks finding those files outside of the vault again. So it's a multi-step process. One of the ways I've seen this done to make it easier is you pack and go to a single folder and then drag and drop that folder into the vault. But you still have to remove the copy on the server, because potentially it can be found. That's probably the best way from there. If file naming is so critical, why not having a built-in file name generator like custom tools? Is there an add-in from SolidWorks I'm not aware of? So that's, again, another aspect of PDM that's in there, is that we can generate file names, more specifically serial numbers, serial number generators to give a custom name automatically. That would be great. It does happen in PDM, and you can create a unique number. I am familiar with custom tools. They do have something very similar. Don, give me a ring or send me an email after we're done. We can talk further about this. Next question. When moving assemblies outside vault into the vault with vault containing the same file names, which way do you go? Well, that's definitely an issue. When something's already in the vault and you're moving something in, you have to verify which one's good. Is it the same file? Well, first thing you can do is maybe see that it's the same ID. You maybe do a geometry compare to compare whether they're exactly the same. You have to make a decision if they are the same file. If they're not the same file, you've got to rename the one that you're potentially moving in to a different name and move it in as a unique ID. If it is the same file, you've got to re-reference or repoint it to the vault to make sure that it's using the correct file. Someone has a question, just what does PDM stand for? That's Product Data Management or Project Data Management. It's just an acronym for the ability to manage all of these day-to-day references, relationships, the day-to-day work as it revolves around files themselves.
Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our blog for more great content by clicking on the links in the description below.